In the name of Almighty God, I hope you're all doing great and you're in the best of spirit and health. So in this video, we're going to focus on HTML D-letter elements. Yeah, what I mean is that HTML elements that start with the letter D. And we have quite a list of them, from data to data list, DLDTDD, the description list family, del, details, definition, dialog, and div. So let's get right into it. So first up, we have the data element. So the data element in HTML is designed to associate a piece of content with a machine-readable equivalent. Okay? This can be very useful when you need to encode data values and data values that are meant to be processed by machines, used programmatically. So that's where this element can be used. So I'm just going to provide a summary and explain based on the example. I guess that'll be more clear, and then you can just anytime you can pause the video and take a look at the text if you want, right? So it takes a value attribute, and that's exactly where it should the machine readable code should go. So let's explain based on the video is getting much based on the example that's getting much better. So you can see I have a product and its name is Innovative Coffee Maker and the price is something like 99.9 USD. So if I don't write this with a data element, it's perfectly fine, right? I mean, I have name Innovative Coffee Maker and price 99.9 USD. So that is vanilla text, right? That's what will be shown in the browser to the users. But in the background, I also want to have some pieces of data, programmatically to be able to use them, right? So the name of the product is Innovative Coffee Maker, but that's not what it's called in my database. So in my database, it has something like this. It has an ID, right? So therefore, I can wrap this Innovative Coffee Maker inside a data element, right? Inside a data element, and then that's going to be shown in the browser with no problem, but also provide a value attribute. And inside this value attribute, I can put that machine readable code. And that's when, when I want to use the, have a programmatic using, then I can simply use this product's ID and then go into the database and all, right? So if it's Innovative Coffee Maker, then that's not possible. That's where the data element is used, as we said in here, right? To associate a piece of content with machine readable equivalents so that it could be parsed and used programmatically, product IDs, prices, that are going to be relevant for scripts or data processing tools, okay, in such cases. So this is going to be the human readable text, and this is going to be, the machine readable text. And also the price section, so the price is 99.9 USD. So this is vanilla text, right? But I want to have this, as a number so that I can use it for whatever the reason, right? So I can wrap this inside a data element and say the value is 99.9, and then that is something that can be used programmatically later on if we need so. So this was the data element. So let's move on. So before that, this is the output, basically the output of this code, right? And it's nothing different. It's nothing fancy. You can just see it's the same output as you would have seen, but this piece of content in the background has a machine readable equivalent encoded inside it, right? That ID. And this also has its numerical equivalent encoded inside it. So we can use them anytime if needed. So next up, it's data list. So the data list element is used to provide an autocomplete feature for input elements. Okay, an autocomplete. So it allows you to define a set of predefined options that the user can choose as they type into the input field. So this element is really useful in forms, when you want to suggest possible values to users, but also allow them to enter custom values. So that's the data list. Okay, so again, I guess alongside code, it will be really more clear, right? We can just read this if you want. So here we go. We have a data list element, right? So the data list element cannot fly solo. It should be tied to an input element. Okay, as we said, it provides an autocomplete feature for an input element. So first up, I have an input element, and with the name of browser and then ID of browser, right? And what should we do basically? So we should have an input, and then we should have a data list, right? So the input element will have an attribute list. Okay, so this list attribute of the input element and the ID of the data list or the things that should match. Okay, so we're saying that this input, the list associated with this input is browsers, right? And that's exactly the ID of the data list. That's how we should do it. We have an input and a data list, so the input's list attribute should match the data list's ID. So the input is a vanilla input, basically, nothing fancy, right? It's a input, and it's a vanilla type text input, right? And then I have a label for the input saying choose your browser from the list or type it. And inside data list, I should use option tags. Okay, the option tags, and I can say option, the value is Edge, and then option, the value is Firefox, and then option. So you can just provide the options in here inside the data list. So then what will happen is something like this, and I guess this is something that I should show you in the browser instead of just the output in here. So we said data list. Here we go. So choose your browser from the list or type it. So the data list, as we said, it provides autocomplete feature. So if this entry, we had an input, the list was browsers, which was the ID of the data list. So if we hadn't provided that data list, so this would have been a vanilla input, with nothing. You should have come here and written whatever you wanted, right? But tying the input with the data list now gives us this autocomplete feature, this set of predefined options that we can use, right? You can just tap down and say it's Chrome, it's Firefox, or if you don't go there, just start writing. This gives you autocomplete, right? So let's say whatever, basically just wanna write Edge, so you see write ed, and then here we go, an autocomplete feature. So that's how we can use data lists. It's pretty handy, it's pretty useful, and just here. Okay, so that's the syntax. You have an input, the list attribute should match the ID of the data list, and inside this you can provide option value, and then that's what's going to be used. So you might say that we also have something called select, a select element that also provides a drop-down list. So then what's the difference, right? So the select element, it also provides a drop-down list, yeah, sure, just like the data list, but it doesn't allow you to enter a custom value. Basically, you have a list, now you have a predefined list, and you must choose something from that list, period. I mean, you can't enter any custom value, but the data list element is pretty free form. You can choose anything from the list, and you can also provide any custom value if you want. On top of that, the select element doesn't provide any sort of autocomplete or something, right? So this is the same thing with the select element, right? Choose your browser from the list. So in here, this is a select element. So just a select element, and again, we have options inside it. I'm going to show you the code. So in here, first up, we don't have any autocomplete or something, right? The reason is that we're not writing anything. This is this set of predefined values, and I must choose anything from here. Done, right? And I cannot enter any custom value or anything. But data list is different. I can enter any value I want, but if the value happens to be something that is inside the list, then it's also gonna give me suggestions that is it this that you meant, right? So effectively giving me an autocomplete feature. But if I'm just using any other browser, like saying I'm using the Ecosia, I can also write that down and then submit the form, right? So that's the difference between data list and select. Data list gives you the ability to enter custom values on top of the values that are inside there, and if it happens to be for any value from here, you can just autocomplete. But select is not like that. This set of predefined value from the drop down, just take just any one of them. This, we can't take anything more. So here's the code and the data list, and the select code is pretty similar, right? So you have a select element with this with an ID and then option value inside it, yeah, like that. So this option, yeah, it has both a opening and closing tag. That's a point that you should pay attention. The option tag, it has both opening and closing, and inside this basically you may also write Edge, but not really needed actually, since providing that inside the value, that's enough, and that's going to show it in the data list itself. So sorry for here that I've missed the closing tags of the option, but do pay attention to that, I guess this also works, yeah, but do pay attention to giving the option the closing tags that it requires. So let's move on to, so this is also a view of that, Chrome after ch, and then Chrome is popping up. So next up, it's DL, DT, and DD. So these elements are alongside each other, or used together to create a description list. Okay, description list. What's a description list? It is a list of terms and their description. So basically we have term, description, term, description. So you've guessed it, right? We have description list. That's the element that you're going to open, and you're going to put all the terms and descriptions inside it. So basically you have a term, you put that inside a DT, and then you have a description, you put that inside the DD. That's it. It's that simple. So let's go. Here we go. I have a description list. I have a list of, term and definitions. So I open a DL element, and everything goes inside that. So my term is HTML, put it inside DT, and then the definition is something like this, put that inside DD. And then my term is CSS, and then the definition is something like this. So this will output something like this. This is my definition, my description list. I think it's something also called definition list, but description list. So this is my description list with the definition term and then the definition data. Definition term, definition data. So that's how we can use it. Pretty simple. DL, DT, and DD. So I guess there's no need to go to browser in here, right? That's fairly simple, and you can get it from the photo. So next up we have the del element. So the del element is used to represent a range of text that has been deleted, right? Some text that has been deleted. So this is particularly, useful for showing edits, and updates to content, right? So we have content and all, so we can say like, this was something like this, but now it's no longer, it's deleted, it's changed. When you want to track changes or, show the difference between two versions of text, that's where you can use the del element. So you can, in a sense, to mark text that has been removed, right? So the visual representation, by default, most browsers, strike through the element, right? That's the best way to show that, like, it's no longer there. It used to be, but it's not meant to be anymore. So by default, anything put inside a del element will be strike through, but you know that we can just change that with CSS anyways we want, but the browser defaults CSS, right? So we have two attributes, site and date time. So let's just go to the code. So let's say I said the capital of France is Lyon, which is wrong, right? So I can just put the Lyon inside a del element. So this date time element, let's just talk about this actually. So we have site and date time. So these are both optional elements, not needed. So the site element, optional attributes. So the site attribute can specify, a URL that'll explain why it was deleted, and datetime can just say when it was deleted, if you need so. So it has a datetime, like this time this piece of text was deleted, this change was brought in, and then so I can replace it with Paris. The capital of France is Lyon. So no, I'm going to delete that, but it's not Lyon, right? It's Paris. So that's also something that I should pay attention to in here. So the del element is often used in conjunction with the ends element, right? So this is the exact opposite. So del is used to show changes that, this element, this piece of text, this piece of content is deleted. It's removed. But ends is used to show that this piece of content is newly inserted, right? Newly inserted. So together, the del and ends, they provide a clear way to indicate changes that are made to the content over time, right? So this is removed, this is newly inserted, like that. So in here also I'm doing the same. The capital of Paris, France is Lyon. So I wrapped Lyon inside a del, that's removed. And then I've added Paris instead. So Paris is wrapped inside ends. So we're talking about D letter elements, but the ends was really important, just like select. So you should have talked about that. So if we see the output for this code is like this. The capital of France is Lyon, so that was deleted, and that's struck through, right? And then, Paris was inserted. So that's how it's shown, with an underline. by default. Ends element is rendered in with an underline. So the capital of France is Lyon. That's strike through, delete it. So this is how it shows changes to content, right? So this was what was written first, but we deleted that. That's strike through, and then this was inserted instead. So there's one more thing that I should talk about actually, and that is these strike through and underline. So we also have these two, HTML elements that do the same, right? Strike through basically strikes through text, and underline underlines it. You can see in here. There you go. It strikes through, and then this underlines. But these elements, I mean, they're just structural. We have two things, structural markup and semantic markup, right? So these are just pure structural markup. The S element for a strike through and the U for underline. I mean, they're just structure. They don't mean anything, right? It's just strike through, and it's not clear for what reason. Does it look beautiful, or you didn't like the word, whatever. And underline is underline. I mean, it's just a structure. It doesn't have any semantic meaning. But on the other hand, del and ends, they are semantic markup, right? They have a meaning. So they're gonna have a specific way that they're gonna be shown in a structure, but they have a meaning, right? So this is deleted, this is removed, this is changed, this is what was there, but it's no longer there, and this is added instead, right? So the del and ends, they have a meaning, they're more semantic, but the S and U, they're just structural markup, no meaning. And that's something that we should pay attention to a lot of HTML elements, right? The div element, we're gonna get there, right? So that it has no meaning, the span element. But then we have article element, so it has a semantic meaning, right? It shows that the thing that goes inside this is an article, right? Rather than div and span, basically they're just structural, they don't mean anything else. They're just containers that can bring together some content, right? So it's a similar case in here with del, ends, S, and U. So let's move on to details. The details element basically is used to create a disclosure widget, which allows you to toggle the visibility of additional information on a web page. It's a way to provide, optional additional information that users can, view or hide as they want. That's it. That's the details element. If you have some additional information that's not that critical to be shown at all times, but it's good to be accessible at arm's length, right? So you can put that all inside the details element, and then you can just toggle its visibility on or off as you need, right? So let's go to the code again. So it has an attribute called boolean, which attribute called open. This is a boolean attribute basically, and boolean attribute means that it takes on two forms, right? Either it's open or not. So you can add this to the end of the details element, and that's gonna show whether the element should be opened by default or not, right? So we said that it's additional information. You can toggle it. It's a disclosure widget, but this attribute can just, if you add it to the end, this just means that show it, open it by default, open it, and then the user can close it if they need it. So let's go to the code that will be more clear. So this is the details element. So inside the details element, I can put whatever content that is additional and not that necessary. And then I have this, so the details element, it's good to store it with a summary element. So this summary element, it just provides you a summary of the content that is inside the details, right? A summary of the content that's inside the details, and that's exactly what will be shown at the top of the disclosure widget, which you can just toggle on and off. And then when you tap it on, when you toggle it on, then it's just going to show all the things that are inside it. So the boolean attribute that we said, the open attribute, it's boolean, right? So that means we can just come in here with the opening tag and just write open or not. If you write open, that's true. If you don't write it, then it's not, right? So you can just space it out and then write open in here, then that'll make the details element open by default. By default it will be open, and then you can just close it if you want. But if you don't add that attribute, then it will be closed by default, and then you can open it if you want. So this is it. So I guess I need to go to code for this one for better understanding and details. So here we go then. We said we have a details element and then we have a summary element. So that summary element is what's going to be shown right at the top. So that just gives you what it says. It gives you a summary of what is inside this details, and then I can just open it or close it as I want. So if I add the open attribute, then it's going to be open by default, right? So that's it. I can open it and read the additional information. So that's the details element. Sorry, I'm just mixing these. So the details element, as we saw, okay? So where can we use it? Basically in whenever we have some additional information, right? FAQs, additional product information, some advanced settings, anything that that we can remove it but have it readily available for those interested whenever we need, right? So let's move on to the next element, and that is the DFN. The DFN element, defn, whatever you call it, is used to represent the defining instance of a term. Okay, the defining instance of a term. So for example, we have a term popping up in our content, and right after that we have its definition. So it's used to represent the defining instance of a term, right? So the purpose of this element is to indicate the term being defined within the context of a definition, phrase, or sentence. It's particularly useful in academic text, documentation, so wherever you want to show that something is being defined, right? So the content is by default rendered in italic. Okay, so let's read on this too. So the define element is used to highlight the first or defining occurrence of a term in a document. It's used as a way to semantically market the terminology for which a defining explanation is provided in the surrounding context. So let's again go to example, and we can see better. It has a title attribute, which we will see how it's used. So let's go. So the define element is used to show, like, we're gonna put something inside the define element. So what we mean is that in the surrounding context, right around here, we have the definition of this thing, right? The definition of the text, the term that is inside the define element. So for example, you see here, we have an definition of the HTML definition element itself, right? So I'm saying the HTML definition element, and here we have HTML, right? So in here I'm showing that I have a definition of this HTML element nearby, right? You can see is used to indicate the term being defined within the context of a definition, phrase, or sentence. So that's the definition of the HTML definition element, right? So in here I can just go and wrap that content. In here I have HTML, right? I can wrap that inside the define element, and so mostly it's that content that we mean that it's being defined, but it's better to use an ID attribute or the title attribute. Yeah, the title attribute. That's better to use the title attribute. Sorry for this. In here, it's the title attribute, and the title attribute, that specifies the term that we are defining, and then we can just go on and add the definition right around it. Okay, that's the point. So the title attribute can be used to provide the term being defined when the content of the define element is not the term itself, but perhaps an abbreviation or symbol. So we can either put it inside the the element itself, right? So we can have the define element, and then the content inside, that is the term that we are defining. So it's much like the definition term definition data situation, right? But it's a little different in a sense that, so whenever we're using the define element, right, I'm using the define element, and inside that I have a piece of content. So I mean that right in the right after this, in the couple of upcoming lines, I'm defining this this term. You got the point? Like right in the couple of next lines, I am defining this term. So whatever the element is that it goes inside the define element, whatever term that is going inside the define element. Sorry for that. Okay, but if it happens to be different, if the term inside the define element is something else, or it's just an abbreviation or anything, we can use the title element. not ID, the title attribute. We can use the title attribute, and inside that we can provide that specific term that is being defined, and then we can continue with the definition and all. Okay, so that's the definition element. So this is something, you go to the web browser and all, sometimes you search and like, what is this thing, what is that thing, right? And then you can see that search engines like Google, they just pop up with snippets, and then they give you the definition, right? There are different things that they're using, AI and all too, but one of the things that they're using is this define element, right? So they go through, like, you say, let's say, what is UEFA Champions League, right? You say, what is UCL? So then it goes through context and goes through web pages and all, and then it tries to find, if UCL is inside any define element, right? So if UCL is inside a define element, it means that right after that, we have a definition of UCL, and then it just goes in and brings all the surrounding text for you in a snippet, and then that's a way to show that the UCL is being defined, and hey, my website has a definition of UCL, right? So that's a way you can just set it off and make it easy for search engines. So one way is that definition list, definition, the description list that we said. So you're gonna have the description, the definition term, and then the definition data, right? So the definition term can be UCL, and then the definition data could be its definition. But it's still, in that place, you can also use the define element. That's just gonna make it even more powerful, right? So I hope it's clear and you're not confused. The define element is used to represent the defining instance of a term. Okay, it has both an opening and closing tags, and so typically the term being defined is the text content of the element itself. It's the text content of the element itself, what goes inside the element. But if it's different, or if we've provided an abbreviation or something inside the element, then we can use its title attribute. The title attribute, and then we can simply say that we are defining this term. Okay, the value of the title attribute is considered to be the term that's being defined, and then right in the couple of next lines we can just define that term, and then this is a way to semantically mark up the definition. So in terms of rendering, it's not anything that fancy, as we said. It's just it's rendered in italics, right? It's rendered in italics. Whatever content you put inside the define element, it's rendered in italics. But it's again, it's not that much a structural markup. It's more of semantic markup. Okay, so we're just writing HTML in here and then putting it inside. So we don't really mean HTML in here, right? We mean HTML, the definition element. So that's why HTML is written inside the define, but then I have a title attribute, title, not ID, saying HTML def. And that's showing that I am defining the HTML definition element right in this paragraph, and then the next couple of lines. That's semantic markup. And then the browser or search engine coming in here, they can just simply come here and then take the whole paragraph, or the collection of lines, and then that can serve as the definition for the term. So we can also link to it, basically, as it's said in here. Basically, we can link to the definition, we can give it an ID attribute, and then link to it using A elements. So that's what I've messed up in here, actually. So you should have both an ID and a title. So the title is what's going to be really used for the term, and the ID is what you're going to have for linking, right? So this is the definition of this term, right? So later in your program, in your web page, you can just say, if you've missed it, you can just say learn more about this thing, and you can use an anchor tag with the href of the hashtag ID. Then it can simply take them back to the definition part. So let's move on to dialog. So this element is used to create a dialog box. So this element is used to create a dialog box or a pop-up window that can display additional content such as forms, information, interactive messages, whatever, right? So we to present content to users that requires their attention or interaction without navigating away from the current page. So that's the dialog element. Okay, it it renders a dialog box, pop-up window, right? We've seen pop-up windows a lot, right? We're using the website, and then a pop-up window shows up. So it may show some information, display additional content, show some information and all, something that needs attention that we know, or it may have a form or something requiring some interaction, some filling, writing, something like that, right? So that's the dialog element. So whatever we want, we put them all inside a dialog element, and then we can just represent that section of the web page to the user whenever it's needed, right? So it's not something that's going to be there, so whenever it's needed, we can just use this dialog element and then present them with a pop-up window for information or interaction, whatever. So there's two types of pop-up windows, in a sense. Two types of the dialog element. We have model and non-model. So the model one is used to create a focus trap, right? Which means that whenever this pop-up window shows up, you cannot interact with the rest of the page until it's not closed, right? Until it's closed. So the pop-up window shows up, so if you don't close it, then you cannot interact with the rest of the page. You should first things first, serve that, read it and then close it, that I've read it, or fill it up, whatever is needed. So that's model. It creates a focus trap. You cannot interact with the rest of the page until you close it. But then we have non-model that it shows up, but you can also interact with the rest of the page, no problem. So again, we have that Boolean attribute open, which shows that should the dialog be open by default or not. So that's something that you mostly don't want, right? The dialog is not shown to the user by default, but it's going to be shown whenever it's needed. So we have JavaScript methods in here now. This needs, as we said, we're going to have the dialog element, but when should we show it? So that's something that needs some JavaScript, and this element can be further manipulated using JavaScript, and it has methods like .show, right? We can get element by ID or query selector, whatever, that, and then we can call .show, and this JavaScript method basically displays a non-model dialog, and then we can say show model. That's gonna display a model dialog, and we say that creates that focus trap and the backdrop, to prevent interaction with the rest of the page. Then the close is used to close it over. So I have a very simple dialog in here. So this is the whole content that I want to show, not at all times, but whenever it's needed, right? So I can put them all inside the dialog element, and I give it an ID, and so this one is not that necessary actually. So I've just used the open attribute in here to have it open by default so we can see the example. So let me just show this how it's going to look like, right? So inside this dialog element, I have an H2, and I have a form with an email input, and with a button, with a submit button, and also a cancel button, right? A submit button has subscribe, and then the cancel button which says close it, right? So then this is the dialog that's going to be shown, right? So I've just used the open attribute to give you an example, but so for example, you may just put this dialog along with another button, the whole dialog with a button, like subscribe to our newsletter. You have a button, you have a piece of a link, and then whenever that's tapped, so you can specify to that link, right? On click, do this, and then you can just use JavaScript to write a function that whenever that link is clicked, then we can just go and select this dialog element and show it, or show model it, right? That's how we can use this. Basically, it needs JavaScript to be used to its full potential. So whenever that link is clicked, or whenever that button is clicked, on click, do this. You can write a function, and then we can get hold of this dialog and then show it, .show or .show model, like that. So I've just used open in here so that we can simply see it. It's a very simple example. So this is how it's going to be rendered, right? We have the H2, the label, and the email input, the subscribe button, and then this cancel button. So this cancel button is used to cancel it, you can close it. So you can see a simple example. On click, document.get element by ID. So that's JavaScript, right? DOM and all, DOM, BOM, those. Or you can just check them up if you want. So the element of the ID of my dialog element is my dialog. Simple. So I can just say on click document.get element by ID dot close. So that's a method that we talked about right in here, right? Close. It's used to close the dialog. So we can dot close, and this functionality is put inside this button with the text cancel. And so whenever you hit the cancel button, then it's just gonna remove it. So if I should show this once to you, we have model dialog. Here we go. So here, this is the example. It's a model dialog, right? So I don't have the rest of the page, and it's a very simple example, but if you have the rest of the page, it's a model dialog. You can still interact with it. Since the open attribute, it shows a model dialog whenever you have it set. So I've called open, so the dialog is here. I can write it, whatever, but as we said, you're mostly going to use it whenever it's needed. With JavaScript, you can say show model, and then the person can use it, say subscribe, or okay, so that needs an email. And then if it's not needed, then we can just hit the cancel button. Then that's just close the dialog and done. So finally, we get to the dev element, and so this element is a block level element that serves as a generic container for flow content. Okay, it's a generic container. As we said, it's a structural markup. It does not have any specific semantic meaning, right? It's a container that can hold a piece of a part of the website, a section of the website. Is just used to group elements, right? Group other elements, some elements that need to go together. You want to make a style on your page. It's mostly used for layout, for styling, for layout. You just want to group a couple of elements together, then you can use the dev element. So it's a generic container that groups them all together. So you can see in some web pages that we have like a part, we have a photo and then some text around it, right? So this whole and then we have another photo and some text, right? They have different background colors. So you can use div in here, right? You can put those all in one div and style them in one way, and put the all other ones in another div and style them as you need. So it's used for grouping elements and for creating layout. It's really important for creating layout. So by default, in HTML is block level elements, so we can simply make vertical layout. Vertical layout is easy, right? So you can put paragraph, H1, H2, the headings, the paragraph. There are block level elements, and they're just going to be stacked on top of each other, and you're going to have vertical layout. But if you want to create horizontal layout, then you can just simply put them all inside a div, and you can change the div's display property to basically inline block, and then you can put another div alongside it. So that's how we can use the div element, to group other elements, and also as a generic container to group for styling, for layout, structure, content in these cases. So by default, the div, it does not produce any visual change, right? You cannot see it. Basically, you can put content inside it, so there's no visual change in the browser. So unless you use CSS. So mostly what we mean is that we group these, and then we use CSS basically to style them in a similar fashion, or to lay them out in a specific way, right? So by default, putting content inside a div, so it doesn't create any visual change. So it does support the global attributes and all. It doesn't have anything really specific attribute. The global attributes, the class, ID, style, other ones, and that can be used with any element. So as we said, it's used to create layouts and for styling, and it's also used for JavaScript in some cases. Yeah, so we can just group elements and then manipulate them using JavaScript to add dynamic behavior. So best practices, as we said, that the div it's incredibly useful. It's one of the most important elements. It has been one of the most important elements in HTML, to group and all. But as we see, if you open up a website, we have one part, something is here, something is there, something is there. So mostly these are all divs, right? Divs are used a lot. If you go into web pages and inspect and check their source code, the div is used a lot. So basically, all of those different parts are created using divs, right? It's it's one div grouping some elements, and then there's another div grouping some other things together. So the div is used a lot, but it was used too much in HTML4 and all, but in HTML5 we got some more some more containers, in a sense, container elements, right? The elements that can group together other elements, that can contain other elements. So now the best practice says that you should use div whenever you want to group something that it does not have any specific meaning, right? But for layout or for styling or for whatever reason, for that reason, use div in those times. But whenever we have a semantic meaning, so div is just a structure, right? So whenever we have a specific meaning, then in that case it's better to use the more specific containers rather than the generic container that div is. So for example, we have our content is divided into sections, so we can use the section element, right? And then put all the content inside it. So that will clearly show that this is one section, this is the other section. The article element, we talked about this too. So for example, it's a news page, and we can just put all our article inside the article element, or well, headings and photos and all, right, inside this element. So that can show that it will semantically show that this has all the article or the information inside it, right? So basically we want to create a nav, right? A navigation, the header part for our website, or we want to create a sidebar. So we can use div, that's no problem. But now we have these elements which are more specific and they convey a specific meaning, right? So we should use the nav element. We want to make a header, or the header element is also there, right? Or we can use a side element. So it's better to use these elements when they're appropriate, right? We can use div anytime you want for any generic grouping, but whenever your grouping has a specific meaning for which we have a more specific container, so then it's better to use them since they give the meaning, right? So if I put the header of my website inside a div, so if someone sees the code, it's a div, so they're not gonna know exactly that it is a header actually, right? So unless they inspect the code a little more deeply. But if you put it inside a nav, so right upon seeing it, you can just know that okay, it's nav, so it's the code, the piece of content that goes in the navigation header, right? Or this is a site, it's something that goes in the sidebar or anything like that, header, footer, right? You can use divs, but in this case it's better to use the more specific containers rather than the general div. So here's an example, simple. You have a div, and I've added some CSS style, background color red. This H1 goes inside it. Then we have another div, this paragraph and anchor tag going inside it. So you can see divs are used to group elements, and this is a pretty simple example. And as I said, you can use it in many complex situations for styling, for layout and all. You can create pretty complex layouts using it, vertical layout, horizontal layout and all. So this is how this will render, right? So I had a div this inside it, and then I gave it a background color, and then add this another div with a paragraph and grouping together the paragraph and the anchor and a little different background color. So well, I hope this was clear to you, and if I've confused you or something, and if you didn't understand anything better, really sorry. And you always have the YouTube, all the other videos, the power of ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini to understand things better and ask for code, for explanations and everything. But I hope this was clear to you, and have a nice time. Farewell. Peace out.